All right, guys. Hey, sorry, I had a meeting, um, so I just switched over to this. Hopefully, you guys saw that you were um, what's it called? You guys were copying this down. We'll get to this in a second. I want to just quickly address something. Justin emailed me, so I appreciate you, Justin, emailing me. Just write in the chat if you guys hear me. My Google Meet's acting up a little bit. You guys hear me? Okay. Okay. So Justin emailed me asking basically, Mr. Panio, how come, like my friends were asking, so it's good. So I want to bring this up with you guys and I'll bring it up with the other classes as well. My friends are asking, how come you don't grade every single assignment? And it's a good question. So I'll answer it for you. Number one, just please keep in mind, I have 190 students. So for me to go back and click every single assignment that I grade, that you do in class is unrealistic a little bit. Very similar to if we were in person and learning, I don't go around and check all of your work. There are certain times where I'll collect your packet and do a packet check and do things like that, but I don't grade each individual assignment, okay, for every single class. Okay, for me to click through 190 names per day after every assignment that I give is just unrealistic. I'll never get anything done. So that's reason one. Reason two is I do grade it. Everything does get graded. If you notice in the first marking period, I can't share my screen. That if you're looking at my screen, if you're looking at the Jupyter grades from the first marking period, you'll see overall classwork grade. I usually do it per unit or per quarter. And I did it in the second marking period. For the first marking period, everyone gets a classwork grade where I go back to you individually and I look at all of your assignments. And if all the assignments are handed in and turned in, you get 100. If there's certain things missing, you get points off. All right, so it does being ended up graded. It's not that I don't grade them. Of course, I grade them. It's just I do it at the end of the marking period, where I can look at you individually and I say, okay, these are the assignments that they did. These are the assignments that they didn't, and here are the grades that go with it. The third thing is you guys are in Regents class. Okay, your classwork is worth only 10% of your grade. This isn't like your other classes, right? Well, your ELI class. Okay, Mr. Beduzzi, my class, and Mr. Lardo's class. Classwork's only worth 10% of your grade. So you really, for me to grade 36 individual assignments in the first marking period for only 10% of your grade doesn't really make too much sense. Okay, it's not worth it for me. It's not worth it for you to have that many classwork assignments in. Basically, every classwork assignment is going to become worthless. So since it's only worth 10% of your grade, that's also another reason. And the fourth thing is, guys, if you're not doing your classwork, okay, if you're not doing the classwork, then you're probably not doing well on the test. Okay, all the classwork's related to the test, and the tests are the ones that are worth 80% of your grade. So that's why we need to make sure, and same thing with the essays, right? The tests and the essays are worth 80% of your grade. So please make sure you're staying up to date with the classwork, because if you're not, then you're going to fall behind and obviously not do as well on the tests. All right, so just keep in mind, they are being graded. Everything is being looked at and factored into when you get your overall classwork grade and obviously your final grade. It's not like you're doing it and it means nothing. Of course it means something, but it also not worth, it's not something I'm going to put every single grade on Jupyter. So I grade the textbook Thursdays, yes. I grade the quizzes and the tests and the essays, and then you get an overall classwork grade at the end of the marking period. And if you've been doing your work, it's very simple. All right, and you'll get a good grade from that. All right, if I had an hour in the morning, if I had an hour and a half in the morning, that's fine. Some of your teachers, Peduzzi only teaches 3 classes. Sharetta only teaches 2 or 3 classes. All right, myself, Mr. Lardo, teach about 14 classes. All right, so it's not, it's not something really that I can do to say, okay, I can now just sit here and grade every single piece of assignment. It's just not a thing. But I trust my process enough that if you are doing the work you're going to be doing on the test, and it's all going to relate, and vice versa. All right, so do you guys have any questions about that? Justin, does that answer suffice? Is that good before I move on? Okay. So you may feel like you're being duped out of a grade because you're not getting as many grades, but trust me, if you do all the work, you're going to get a very good classwork grade at the end of the marking period, and that's all you really want, right? Is you want a good classwork grade. But even in Regents, it's not worth a ton of points. All right, everything's centered around the tests and the quizzes, and that's how the Regents class is, and that's how high school is. All right, that's how high school is as well. All right. All right, so let's go into today's assignment. So yesterday we looked at five laws or five policies that limited immigration into the United States. Okay, as you saw, our population was getting very, very large over a very quick period of time. So what we need to do now is, okay, we need to limit the amount of immigrants. Now you're going to see why today you have to have some sort of limit on immigration. There's so many people in the world, you're going to learn today, you can't let every single person in. So even if you have a pretty open immigration policy, there's 7.2 billion people in the world. You can't let in all 7.2 billion people. You have to have some limits on something. All right, so let's look at some ways and some limits and laws that we had back in American history. Now, these are related to the reading from yesterday, so this is kind of a review. The only one that wasn't there was the literacy test. So we're going to start with that one. All right, so we have seen the literacy test already, but we saw the literacy test under the auspices of the voting in the United States. One second. Excuse me. And we saw how effective those literacy tests was at preventing African Americans from voting. Okay? We're going to use the same thing, and we're going to give the same test to immigrants coming into the country, specifically immigrants coming into Angel Island. If they were an immigrant coming into from another country, we wanted to limit them from coming, we had to say that they had to pass a literacy test first before they entered the United States. Now, this is a very unfair test because we saw the literacy tests and they're very hard to pass. Now, picture giving this test to someone that can't read English, okay, or reads broken English. This is not going to do well. So if you want to keep immigrants from entering the United States, give them this test and when they fail, send them back home. This is a very unfortunate thing because some of these literacy tests were used to stop immigrants from coming into the country. All right, so that's one of the smallest ones that doesn't happen that often. We're going to look more at these laws and agreements because these laws and agreements were the ones that come up on the Regents more. So let's take a look at the first one, the Chinese Exclusion Act. All right, if you know what the word exclusion means, then the law is pretty straightforward, to be honest. What does it mean to be excluded from something? I'll leave that in the chat for you guys. What does it mean to be excluded from something? Oh, no one knows what it means to be excluded from something? Removed, left out. Left out is better, okay? Left out or getting kicked out is a little bit better. So what the Chinese Exclusion Act is going to suspend and not allow Chinese immigrants from coming into the country from 1882 to 1902. Specifically, it was going to target Chinese workers. If you were someone coming from China to come and work, okay, which obviously many immigrants were, you were not allowed to enter the United States from 1882 to 1902. All right, 20 years, we were not allowing Chinese people to really enter the country. All right, now, does this last into 2021? No, of course not. Chinese people are allowed to come into the country now. But for a period of time, we were getting so many Chinese immigrants coming in, and they were bringing in their different cultures, and they were taking jobs away from Americans, that America actually stopped Chinese people from entering the country. And think about the outrage that would come around in 2021 if we say, okay, people that are from Brazil are not allowed to come into the country. People that are from, I don't know, Croatia are not allowed to come into the country. All right, that would cause some problems. But back then, it's a little more understanding because we had so many immigrants coming in. All right. Now, the Chinese Exclusion Act faced a lot of backlash because this law was specifically targeting Chinese people. And even at the time, people thought it was unfair for just targeting the Chinese people. So the next group we're going to not allowed to come in, basically, is through the Gentleman's Agreement, and that is the Japanese people. The Japanese people, okay, were not allowed to enter the United States for a short period of time as well. But we don't come out with a law like the Chinese Exclusion Act and say, okay, now we're going to have the Japanese Exclusion Act. We do it a little bit differently. So the Gentleman's Agreement is an informal agreement where we had with Japan. So whenever you make a gentleman's agreement with someone, okay, whenever you get a gentleman's agreement with someone, that's like you're getting a handshake to basically go and describe. So like basically you have a conversation with someone, and a gentleman's agreement is when you basically secure it with a handshake and like a non-verbal agreement as opposed to like signing a contract. So we had this kind of under the table gentleman's agreement with Japan that said we will allow Japanese immigrants from coming into the United States as long as the Japanese people don't allow any ships or people to be sent to the United States. So Japan knew not to send any people to the United States, as we would let them in if they ever got here, but if they're not able to come to the United States via their planes, via their boats and ships, then basically they're not allowed to come to the United States. Okay? So we did not stop Japanese immigration from coming in. We said they're allowed to come in, but we had this kind of gentleman's agreement with Japan, like we didn't want anyone from Japan coming in again. Okay, because we have just such a rise in immigration, and our population in the West was getting so large that we wanted to limit it a little bit. All right, and we chose the Japanese as well. All right, the last two are very similar. The Quota Act. Okay, so the Quota Act is, first you need to know what a quota is. Okay, and I know that there were questions on this yesterday, but a quota is a certain number or percentage you have to go above or stay under. So in this case, we want to stay under a certain amount. But in my class, obviously, to pass the class, you need to reach the quota of at least a 65. Once you reach a 65, you have passed my class and you get a Regents credit. Okay? But many people have to hit quotas, okay, or stay under a quota to make sure that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. So in this case, we passed two laws in the 1920s. Now, this is a little bit past the time frame we're looking at, but this just goes to show you that there are ways that we're going to limit immigration. We'll look at more in the 1920s why these two laws were passed again. But the Quota Act is going to restrict the amount of immigrants to a city or town by 3% per country. Okay, place could not be more than 3% whatever. Okay, Italian, Irish, German, or whatever. So let's take the Bronx. Let's say the population of the Bronx, okay, was 3% Italian. That means no one else is allowed to immigrate into the Bronx of Italian descent. Okay, they basically said you're not allowed to come in if you're of Italian descent. What happens when it reaches to 3%? Let's say it's 3% Italian across the rest of the country. No more Italian people are allowed to enter the country. All right, so this spread out the amount of immigrants within our country, and obviously stopped any immigrants from coming in if it was over 3%. If the number was, let's say, let's say the number was 2% Mexican. If it was 2% Mexican, then they were allowed to come into the country because they didn't reach that 3% quota. So this is another way we restricted immigrants from coming in because our numbers got too big too quick. So we had to restrict the amount of people that were coming in per country. All right, and even so, 3 years later, we're going to take that number of 3% and we're going to lower it to 2%. Okay, we're going to lower it to 2%. All right, now it went from 3% to 2%. And also the National Origins Act banned people from the Middle East and Asian immigrants for a short amount of time. Okay, so if you were from the country of Vietnam, if you were from the country of China, if you were from the country of Yemen, if you were from the country of Pakistan, pretty much any place in Asia, you are not allowed to come into the country for a short period of time. So there have been many laws throughout the United States history where we've limited immigration. One of the first things that, no, Gentiana, they were not deported. Good question. So let's say, this is a good question. Let's say the population of the Bronx was 6% Pakistani. They're not going to deport any Pakistani people. They're just not going to let in any more Pakistani people. All right. So if it was already over 6% or if it was already over 3%, then no, they wouldn't send anyone back. They weren't doing that, but they were not going to allow anyone in. Okay. Remember, just look at the title. It's limiting immigration. It's not necessarily sending people back. So that's a really good question, though. All right. All right. So we need to move on. What we're going to do now is we're going to watch kind of a more recent video looking at the reasons why you have to limit immigration. So I want to give a bias alert. This is something that is going to be biased to show you why we kind of have to have some limits on immigration. So if you're someone who believes that we should let in every person in this country, it's okay to believe that. I have no problem with that. But I think we need to look at, just from a facts-based perspective, how large the country, how large the world is comparatively to the United States. And not only how large it is, how incredibly poor other countries are compared to the United States. I often say a poor person in the United States is richer than 98% of the world. 98% of the world. And you're going to see that here through some comparisons. So you're going to see an assignment here called Immigration and Gumballs. Okay, so if you guys can open up your assignment on the Google Classroom, that would be great. All right. You see I shared this tab here. All right, and it looks like this. Give me 1 second. Wait, am I no longer sharing my screen? What in the world? Let's try that again. Okay, so what I want you to do now is, after the notes, out of the 5 laws that you copied down, which one of the five laws do you believe to be the most effective at limiting immigration, and why? So you can answer that question at any point. But while the video, I want you to look at questions 2, 3, 4, and 5. This is something we're going to look at as a class, and we're going to answer these questions as we kind of go through this. All right, so I'm going to answer questions 2, 3, 4, and 5, okay, as the video is going on. So take a look at the video. Let me go to it here. So with the person, oh, I did it again. It's been one of those mornings. Okay, sorry. So if you're looking back at the video, you're going to notice it's called World Poverty, Immigration, and Gumballs. So what is the gumballs portion? Well, the gumballs are going to be a representation of each is going to be a representation of, you know, people in this world. You're going to see how many people are in this world comparatively to the United States. And the whole premise is the idea, listen, if we have a very strong country, if you have a very good country, why don't we bring people in to allow them to be further happy and better? Okay, and there's a good point to that, but Roy Beck, the presentator, is going to kind of have this kind of notion, okay, look, here's why we can't let everyone in. And here's why we need to have limits on immigration. This is why sometimes we need laws to limit immigration. So we're going to look at that video here and take a look at the questions as we go on.
Some people say that mass immigration into the United States can help reduce world poverty. Is that true? Well, no, it's not. And let me show you why. This gumball represents the 1 million legal immigrants that the United States has taken every year on average since 1990. Now, who in the world deserves our humanitarian compassion? The World Bank has one measure of the desperately poor of the world. They make less than $2 a day. And how many people make less than $2 a day in the world? Well, let's start with Africa. In Africa alone, there are 650 million people who make less than $2 a day. 650 million. And in India, another 890 million people, desperately poor. China adds another 480 million people, making less than $2 a day. And unfortunately, the rest of Asia has a heartbreaking 810 million people who the World Bank says make less than $2 a day. And finally, there's 105 million of Latin America's population that are desperately poor. All told, the World Bank says there are 3 billion people in the world, 3 billion people who are desperately poor, making less than $2 a day. That's 3,000 gumballs.
Okay, so number 2 is 3 billion people. 3 billion people make less than $2 a day, okay, which is kind of absurd. That's about half the world, 40% of the world. Okay, so comparatively, you see how poor a lot of these places are. So the idea is, from a lot of people that are open to immigration, is, hey, let's bring in some of these people, let's bring in more people, and we'll go from there. So we bring in 1 million legal immigrants, okay, a year, and you're about to see that for number 3 coming up here, so take a look.
And every year, we take 1 million and suggest that we've somehow made a humanitarian difference. Of course, we don't pull our immigrants from these desperately poor populations, do we? These people are too poor, too sick, too disconnected to make it here as immigrants. We tend to pull our immigrants out of the better off poor of the world. And Mexico tends to define the type of immigrant that we bring here because the plurality of people come from Mexico. And Mexico is poor. How many people in the world live in countries that have average incomes lower than that of Mexico? And the World Bank tells us that that number is these 3 billion plus another 2.6 billion people. 5.6 billion people in the world who live in countries with average incomes below that of Mexico. That's 5,600 gumballs. And so what is it that the elites are telling us? They're telling us that when we take this 1 million immigrants, that we somehow or another are tackling world poverty. And we have to do it regardless of the effect on our unemployed, the working poor, the most vulnerable members of our society, regardless of the effect on our natural resources. Even if we went by the most radical proposals in Washington, which are to actually double our immigration to 2 million a year, which would totally overwhelm our physical, natural, and social infrastructures, we couldn't make a noticeable difference. And we may be really hurting the impoverished people of the world because the million that we do take are among the most energetic, often the better educated, certainly the most dissatisfied people that if they did not immigrate would be the agents for change to improve the lot of all the people in these countries. The true heroes in the global humanitarian field are the people in these countries who have the wherewithal to immigrate to another country, but instead stay in their countries to apply their skills to help their fellow countrymen. Unfortunately, our immigration system tends to entice these very type of people to abandon their countrymen. The impossibility of making even a dent is actually worse than it looks here. Because last year, when we took 1 million immigrants, these countries added, births over deaths, 80 million more people into the impoverished population. And this year, Congress is bringing in 1 million legal immigrants. And this year, according to the United Nations, these countries are expected to add another 80 million people. And next year, you can be quite sure that Congress, unless stopped by the American voters, will bring in another 1 million immigrants. And these countries, unfortunately, will be adding another 80 million people into these impoverished nations. We could take 5 million a year, but we'd never get ahead of what's happening in these countries. Not in this century. Don't you see? Immigration can never be an effective or significant way to deal with the suffering people of the world. They have to be helped where they live. 99.9% of them will never be able to immigrate to a rich country. There's no hope for that. They have to bloom where they're planted. The only place that 99.9% of these people can be helped is where they live. Let's help them there.
Okay, so let's go over 4 and 5 quick, then I'll give the other perspective that goes against what he's kind of saying, so you have kind of both sides. But why could we never bring in all immigrants and help out all people around the world? There are just too many of them. There's just too many of them, and if you saw, 80 million people are being born into these poorer countries every year. So it's like we'll never ever catch up and make a dent on the amount of people that are being born and they're born into the country. All right. And number 5, what does the speaker say is better than welcoming all of these immigrants? He says it's better to help them where they live. So building up their country's economies, building up their, we'll talk about this more a little bit later on, but building up the other countries and be allies with these countries so they have a better stance of, better circumstance of living, that could help out a lot too. So if you want to help out those people. Now, the other side of this will be, yeah, we're bringing in 1 million immigrants, but each person that you bring in is profoundly changing their lives, and isn't that a great thing? Shouldn't we try to do that? And that's a good point, okay? But the whole conversation we haven't had yet is, besides the legal immigrants we're bringing in, guys, don't forget, we also have the illegal immigrants. So I wanted to remind you, because it's going to get into our next part of our assignment. Okay. Remember, we have people coming into the country without our permission sometimes. So it's not really 1 million immigrants we let in a year. It's maybe closer to 1.5 million or close to 2 million immigrants a year. Okay, and that is a lot. Understand, when an immigrant comes into the country, they're going to go to our country's schools. Um, they're going to have jobs. They're going to take up space. They're going to take homes. They're going to take away. I'm not saying take away, but they're going to need their jobs. They're going to need their houses. They're going to need their living space. And obviously, there are Americans who are already poor and struggling. So you have to kind of have this balance of letting in people, okay, to be a part of our country, and then sometimes protecting the people that are in our country, right? I gave you the example yesterday. Like, you don't want a country, excuse me, you don't want a class that is 30 students to turn into a class of 75 students, okay, because we have so many more people coming into the country. But that's what will happen if you let in a lot more. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we want to take a look at what your immigration policy is. Okay, we want to look at what your immigration policy is. All right, I'm having a problem with my tabs. It's really annoying me. I have to leave the Google Meet and come back, but whatever. All right, so if you take a look at the Padlet, okay, you basically are going to want to pick a number. Okay, I'm going to read all the numbers to you, but you want to say, am I a number 1? Am I a number 5? Am I a number 10? You want to think about what your immigration policy is. As you get older and you start getting more into politics and more into voting, each particular politician is going to have a policy that you want to kind of align with. Okay, so let's go over the topic of immigration. What is your immigration policy? Right, there's many policies around the world. Okay, there's many policies in this country. Some things you're going to be in favor of, some things you're not going to be in favor of, and that's okay. All right, but you want to figure out what policy you are. So you're going to write in the chat what policy you think you are after I read them all to you. All right, so it's going to work in the order of 1 being the most open forms of immigration to a 10, not 11. Sorry, I got to delete this. Hold on. Okay, you're going to go from 1 being the most open forms of immigration to 10 being the most closed forms of immigration, where we want like no immigrants. So let's see where you fall on the spectrum. All right, so if you believe 1, that there should be no borders within the country and everyone should be free to live and roam wherever they want. So we don't have the United States of America. We're all part of the same planet Earth. You're number 1. Okay, people should be able to come and go as they please. Number 2, I believe that there should be no borders, but immigrants can choose to move anywhere they want legally or illegally. So if someone from, if someone from Britain wants to come into the United States, they're allowed to come into it and have a life here with no legal inspection. They just come in. So that's more of a 2. Number 3, you believe that there should be borders of countries, but anyone is allowed to enter a country legally or illegally. So, every country should be defined, but they should be allowed to enter the country. Okay? Number 4, I believe that legal and illegal immigrants are allowed to enter a country, but only illegal immigrants should be allowed if there is a tough circumstance, such as they are poor or struggling. So if you saw one of those people that are very poor in a country, you'd be more willing to let them into the United States, okay, because they're not doing well. Okay, so they should be given the opportunity to come here. Number 5, the only illegal immigrants that should be allowed in our country are people who are refugees. So people who are literally about to die in their country. Those should be the only legal immigrants that are coming in. And mind you, if you're choosing 1 through 5, you're okay with legal immigrants. You're okay with those 1 million legal immigrants a year. But if you're choosing 5, you only want a special circumstance for people to come in without approval. All right. Number 6, no illegal immigrants or refugees are allowed, but anyone who comes in legally is allowed to enter. So if you fill out the form, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter where you're from. If you fill out the form and come into the country, whether you're rich or poor, you're allowed to enter. Okay, if you get approved to come into the country, you should be allowed to enter. All right. Number 7, legal immigrants are allowed to come in as long as they are going to contribute to American society, such as have a job, pay taxes, and not break laws. So you don't want someone coming into the country that's going to live off the government, meaning that's going to live off of taxes and taxpayer money so they can survive. You want them to come in and have a job, you want them to pay taxes, and you want them to, follow the laws. That would be a 7. Okay, you don't want any former criminals, let's say, to come into the country. Number 8, Legal immigrants are allowed, but they need to be wealthy and smart. Because understand, when a poor person is in our country, they often have things. I know we haven't talked about this yet, but they often have to collect certain things from the government. Okay, that might be unemployment. That might be Social Security. They may live more off the government, which means that they're living more off people's taxes. So if people can live on their own and not live off the government, you would be a number 8. You don't want anyone that is poor and uneducated to be allowed to enter. And you may also support a border wall as well to make sure that people aren't coming in illegally. Number 9 would believe only the best of the best legal immigrants are allowed in the country. They would support a border wall and laws as well to ensure no illegal immigrants are allowed to enter the country. So you could say no illegal immigrants are allowed to enter, okay, but how do you make sure? Okay, well, a wall between Mexico and the United States or Mexico and Canada may be able to do that. All right, a big thing under Trump was obviously the Mexican border wall. And the reason is we would say we only want legal immigrants, but still then we would have, thousands upon thousands of illegal immigrants coming into the country, and we weren't enforcing the law. All right, and number 10, you were kind of the thought, no immigrants are allowed into the United States whatsoever. America has to take care of its own and be protected, and the more immigrants you let in, the less you're taking care of the people already born here. So this is more of the nativist. 9 and 10 are more of the nativist type of approach, which is fine. All right. So in the chat now, please write whatever number you are. So go through and say, okay, I'm a number 3. Okay, and write, in the chat what number you are. And if you're not sure what your number is, go with your gut. Okay, a lot of what, looking at what policy you have within a country and your viewpoint on certain things in politics is, what your gut says. So if you feel like, we want some more immigrants coming in, you might be more like a 3 or a 4. If you think we should, only have certain immigrants coming in and making sure they're legal, you might be more like a 7 or an 8. Okay, whatever number you are is fine, but post in the chat what number you think you are. Okay, Justin says Gut says 4. Gentiana says 3. Okay. Kiara says 4. Yahia says 6. Okay. Let's see. Who else do we need to hear it from? Abigail, what number are you? Sure. You can click on this on the document if you need to. You should be able to open it and look at it if you need to go. All right, so regardless, Abigail's going to choose. It looks like you guys are mostly in the 3 to 6 range. She chooses 4. Okay, so I think that's a very, fair place to be. Now, each president, each politician is going to have a little bit more of a different immigration policy, right? Each president is going to have a little bit of a different immigration policy. So like Trump might be a 7 or an 8, or really an 8 or a 9, right? I'm not sure what Joe Biden would be. His stance on immigration has been a little bit unclear. He may be more like a, I'd say a 4 or a 5. Where Barack Obama was maybe more like a 3 or a 4. Each president is going to have a different immigration viewpoint. And, if immigration is very important to you, you want to vote for people that are very similarly aligned. Now, if you don't care so much about the immigration policy, then you don't have to vote with the person that goes along with you, but it's good to know where you kind of stand. So you guys are going to answer question 7 on your own. Why did you choose that number? And why is that your immigration policy? So you answer that when you have a moment. All right. I want to go back to, and I don't know if it's going to share, but hopefully I'm having some technical difficulties. Let's see. I want to answer these 2 questions before we go. No, it's not sharing. This is really annoying to me, honestly. It's really, really annoying to me. I have to leave my Google Meet, I think. All right, let's do these 2 Regents questions before we go. Let me see. Okay, hold on. I just got to make sure something quick. Perfect. Okay. So which action is an example of nativism in the 1920s? This is a good review from yesterday and today. Now you hear, I'm usually doing what I usually do. I'm just having, the Google Meet is having an issue. Which action is an example of nativism in the 1920s? Abigail's correct. Passage of laws restricting immigration. Okay, when we pass these laws like the Chinese Exclusion Act, like the Quota Act, we're limiting immigration. That is an example of nativism. That's something that the Know Nothing Party would be very much in favor of. The intent of the United States immigration laws of the 1920s was to what? Anything on us? 4? Yes, you guys are correct. 4 is correct. Restrict immigration through the use of quotas. Just please keep in mind in the 1920s that those are specifically related to quotas, okay, not just like a law that excluded people. All right, so it is 9:12. I want to mention one final thing quickly before you go. I have posted your midterm preparation studying assignment. Your midterm will be on January 29th. Now, we will spend all of the week of the 25th to 29th studying. Okay, but if you want to get a head start and want to take a look, please go to the quiz/test prep and then take a look at some of your studying for the next couple of weeks. All right, so yeah, it's 9:12. You guys got to go to your next class and have a good rest of your day.